this session later on. But appreciate everybody making time to come to the virtual AAG. I wish we were all in Denver together. But I'm really looking forward to a good conversation here about community geography and some work that's going on in community geography. I should mention that this is a panel of sessions that's organized in parallel with ongoing efforts for a special issue of the journal GeoJournal on community geography. We've got about 15 folks who are submitting articles there that's in the process of still getting organized, and we're in the peer review stage of things right now. I'm doing that along with Kate Mariner, who I think is on here, Tim Hawthorne, and Hannah Torres are co-editing with me on that. Eileen Nicholas is also on this call, and she's helping organize. She's going to handle the chat side of things. If you do, well, the basic format here is going to be that we are going to, oh, Hannah's joining now. We are going to stream most of these talks, except for Annie's talk at the end is going to be delivered live, and I'm going to help flip through slides. We're not going to have a ton of time for Q&A. We've got 6 speakers, but we will try to have a question or 2 for each one. I am going to encourage you, and as long as everybody stays in their best behavior, this should work, to post questions in the chat while the talks are going on, and the speakers can try to respond. So please do feel free to do that. You also should all the participants should have reaction buttons. And so if you want to clap at the end, you should be able to clap there if you want to. So we can't all be in person, but that's the way things go. I think we'll run with this for now, and then feel free to message if you're having some kind of technical problem. So I'm going to start with Kristen, who's on here. Kristen, you wanted to say hi real quick?
Sure, so I can unmute myself. Okay. Having me, it's nice to see everyone here. I'm glad that we could do this virtually, so I'll have a chance to share some of our talk. So yeah, I'm Kristen, and I'm a faculty member in the Geography Department at Brandon University in Manitoba, Canada.
Cool. So then I'm going to go ahead and stream Kristen's talk, and then she'll have a chance to take a question or 2, but feel free to post questions for her while this is going on.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kristen Lowitt. I'm a faculty member in the Geography Department at Brandon University, and I'm going to share with you today a few insights for advancing praxis in community geography from myself and my colleague, Charles L.I.F.T, both 2 settler academics, and in collaboration with. So this project emerged out of a process of relationship building with this community and with the chief, Dean Sayers, and was put together in response to the community's interest to collect and to share their experiences surrounding the ecological, social, cultural, and political relations of fishing. So we used narrative interviewing and film to document community knowledge pertaining to current and historical fishing practices. And with the support of a grant, we were able to work with a filmmaker, Sarah Furlot from Thunder Bay, who's presently putting together a documentary to enable Batchewana First Nation to share their story with a wider audience. And this is really their story of the struggle to exercise their fishing rights in pursuit of self-determination and food sovereignty. So I should note that all the information we collected is retained by the community. The community also will have copyright of the documentary. So before I kind of tell you a little bit more about what we did, the time we spent in the community gathering some of these stories, I just want to provide a little bit more community context. Actually, you go back to the previous slide for a moment. So you'll see a map there on the left of the slide showing the location of Batchewana First Nation and their main reserve community, the Rankin Reserve, which is situated just outside the town of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, also across the border from Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. So Batchewana First Nation is located on this northeastern shore of Lake Superior. Their traditional territory spans from the Whitefish Islands, historically significant fishing grounds here in the St. Mary's River, connecting Lake Superior and Lake Huron, extends up to about Pakasaw and then some distance inland. So for millennia, Batchewana First Nation made use of Lake Superior's abundant wildlife fishing with fish as a regular food source, deeply integrated into cultural and spiritual practices. European colonization severely impacted these practices and ways of life, but Batchewana First Nation members continue to fish and insert their inherent Aboriginal treaty rights. So the community today operates subsistence and commercial fisheries, which are central to livelihoods, nutrition, and food sovereignty in terms of exerting control over their food systems. So Chief Dean Sayers of the community is very clear then that Batchewana First Nation retains sovereignty over their lands and waters as what he has referred to as the first level of law. In this quote on the slide, Chief Sayers is referring to the inherent responsibilities and obligations that his people have to protect the water and fisheries of Lake Superior. In line with these inherent rights and responsibilities, they haven't entered into a fishing agreement with the province of Ontario. Ontario has delegated authority for fisheries and inland waters, and Batchewana First Nation continues to operate their fishery outside of any provincial licensing or management system, asserting their rights and governance as primary. However, the province refuses to recognize Batchewana's jurisdiction, so there are ongoing tensions. So we spent a week in the community last June. Myself, Charles, Sarah, our filmmaker, many of our days sort of looked like this, and we were driving around with Chief Dean Sayers, sort of visiting and exploring places, people in their territory. And we completed 11 in-depth video interviews with fish harvesters, youth, elders, community leaders. Sarah recorded these interviews, which used a narrative interviewing approach. So this is one which really prioritizes the storyteller's perspective rather than imposing a strict research agenda. And it was an approach that really fit well with Sarah's strength as a filmmaker, and it also aligns with oral storytelling traditions. So I'll tell you just briefly about some of the people we spoke to and what they shared before I kind of provide some further reflections on more the kind of methodological facets of this work. So the first person we interviewed was Jim Sayers. You can see him there on the left. He is a fishing captain. He runs a family fishing business called Crane Fisheries, named after the Crane clan to which he belongs. He fishes out of Mamance Harbor, which is just a bit north up the shore there on Lake Superior from the Rankin Reserve. And he owns the vessel he's in here called the Gordona J, which is named after his parents, Gordon and Donna, who are instrumental in pursuing Batchewana First Nations treaty right to fish. Jim is also passionate about reestablishing a fishery at Gross Cap. This is an historically important location in the community for trading fish. So you can also see on the right, Sarah and the audio technician setting up their equipment on Jim's fishing boat. We also spoke with James Agua here. He runs Agua Fisheries along with his son and other crew members. This is the largest Indigenous owned and operating fishing business on the Canadian side of Lake Superior. It's a family business, so his sons are involved in it, which is really important to James in terms of kind of maintaining some of these family fishing traditions. So they're seen here in their new fish processing plant, which they secured a grant to build. And they have a new filleting machine, and this allows them to retain more value for their catch rather than sending it elsewhere for processing, and to produce more value-added products, including smoked fish. And so over the past few years, they've been putting together a strong network of customers, including restaurants, farmers markets, and have recently also started a fish and chip stand in the community. This is Dylan Agua. He's the youngest fishing captain in Batchewana. He started fishing at a young age with his uncle, and he shared with us how he feels the community appreciates him as a fish harvester, and the risks he's taking every day to go out on the lake and put food on people's tables. He's very passionate about getting more youth involved in fishing, which he considers his inheritance. In this photo, you can see Chief Dean Sayers on the right, walking with here Vernon Surratt, a former chief. They're walking towards the teaching lodge that they gave us a tour of. And so for Dean, throughout this project, incorporating ceremony into the research was very important. And so we were fortunate to spend a day engaged in ceremony with members of the community. And Dean said to us after we spent this week together, he said, what really makes this work that we're doing really special is that we incorporate spirit and ceremony. And that has tremendous value. I think that's going to provide the longevity of the applicability of what we learned and discussed over the course of the entire project. Lastly, this is Greg Agua. In the 1990s, he was charged for fishing without a license, and so he was at the heart of a court case that ultimately led the Ontario Supreme Court to reaffirm that Batchewana First Nation has a commercial right to fish. And so Greg shared with us sort of where he gets some of this strength to kind of fight governments and fight for fishing rights, and how this has come out of his kind of previous experiences and traumas. He said it's from the residential schools that they couldn't break me, they couldn't make me cry, they couldn't make me grovel, and that's what makes me strong to go against the governments. So Greg really a central figure in Batchewana's struggles for fishing rights. So I want to conclude just by offering a couple of reflections on this project, particularly in terms of this field of community geographies. So first, in terms of reflecting on what we learned, then this project demonstrates clearly how fisheries are powerful sites of reconciliation, and not just in terms of reconciling relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, but as John Burroughs and other Indigenous scholars have said, reconciliation in terms of the active resurgence and celebration of Indigenous cultures and identities. And so this is central to building self-determination and food sovereignty. However, from a methodological standpoint, and I think also in keeping with a theme of community geographies, we also sought to collectively take up the call to not only be addressing food sovereignty or to be addressing fisheries as an object of study, but also to engage in food sovereignty's ethical and political imperatives as part of the research project. So that is to think about and enact ways of building reciprocity and solidarity. So for example, through the use of narrative interviews and film, of equalizing power relations through sharing control, of acknowledging our positionality, and pursuing transformative orientations as key elements of this food sovereignty research praxis. In this case, kind of challenging settler colonialism as is expressed, on Lake Superior and the kind of suppression of Indigenous fishing rights. So engaging with food sovereignty's political and ethical imperatives aligns with a focus on praxis and community geographies in terms of blending research and action, valuing marginalized perspectives, solving community-based issues. So significantly more than just creating a documentary film or conducting interviews, this project has been about understanding ourselves, our practices, each other. So speaking for myself, I grew up in Ontario, and through this project, it's impossible for me now to see this lake or this land the same way. And it's really forced me to reflect on some of the limitations of my upbringing and education. So our experiences in this project support emerging discussions of community geography as more than a particular technique, tool, or outcome, but a process of co-learning and relationship building. And we hope that, we've begun to do this, I think, as a research team and with the community, but we hope that the outcomes from this project will continue to foster that relationship building across wider audiences. We're presently working on a paper that explores some of these methodological facets and implications of our work, and I would really appreciate your ideas and feedback.
All right, so we're going to pause before we jump into Guillermo's paper. And for those of you who are joining during this, welcome. And if you've got questions that you'd like to ask, Kristen, you can put the information in the chat, or put your question in the chat, and we'll create a second here. We'll take a couple minutes here to field some of those, but then Kristen can also be continuing to respond to those. So please do post questions there. Eileen, do you want to read off questions as they come in? We'll do one or two.
Sure, yeah. So Annette is, said, I am curious to learn more about what you said regarding engaging in ceremony as important.
Can I respond orally rather than type my response in the chat?
Please do.
Yeah, it's probably easier. Okay. All right. So that was something that I think really came strongly from our community partners in the project and from Chief Dean Sayers. And so it was an emphasis on research, not just as kind of data collection, but as research itself as a process of relationship building and really prioritizing that. And so for the community, then ceremony was important for them in terms of bringing people together around this project, connecting with elders. We engaged in kind of ceremony for a day with the community that we were invited to join, and different elders came and also shared stories related to our project pertaining to sort of broadly sort of fisheries and some of the different sort of spiritual and cultural aspects of their practices around Lake Superior. And just was looking at the other question that came in.
Yeah, this is a question from Tracy. They said, thanks, Kristen. What are your thoughts on how you might extend some of your experience you described for yourself about how your perspective changed to others not directly involved in the research? Do you have plans around engagement with the documentary beyond just viewing it?
Yes, so that's a good question. That's something we were kind of working, I guess, through with the community in terms of what that looks like afterwards. So the ownership for the documentary, rests with the community. So it is ultimately kind of up to them, I guess, how they want to share that. But they were excited about putting this together as a way of trying to reach sort of other audiences with this story and the struggle for their fishing rights. So as we kind of get closer to finishing that up, some of the conversations we're going to, we'll have as a group might be about how we can share this film more. If there are, festivals we want to put it in, or are planning to do, hopefully kind of certainly a launch in the community first, and then maybe a larger launch in the region to invite people to come and watch that. So those are sort of, things that we're kind of thinking through at the moment, how we could kind of do that to hopefully reach more people with this work.
I'm going to go ahead and jump into the next presentations, but I encourage the Q&A can kind of continue. So Ajeev's posting something. Feel free to kind of continue to go on in the chat as you're listening to our next speaker, who's Guillermo Douglass-Jaimes. Guillermo, do you want to just say hi and introduce yourself briefly?
I'll just say hi. I introduced myself in the video, so let's just go on.
Okay, we'll go ahead and jump in. We'll keep things moving here.
Analysis at Pomona College, and I'll be presenting my work, Blurring Boundaries of the Slum Divide through Precision Mapping in Rio de Janeiro. Community mapping with low-cost handheld GPS devices, digital cameras, and smartphones has increasingly organizations to identify environmental and health threats, as well as available resources to address those concerns.
If I just jump in right now while we get the audio up.
Yeah.
Basically, this work is about looking at the community mapping. The idea that community mapping has started to proliferate throughout the world, and the use of smartphones and kind of these new novel technologies to actually help in the mapping efforts. But they raise questions about the kind of the precision that gets embedded into these tools that show us that we may believe that there's some more precision with these tools versus some previous forms of community mapping. I'm just going to keep going until you give me a note on the thing here. The basic of this work comes from a methodology of kind of using community mapping data that was gathered from community folks who did a mapping in response to a crisis moment of some flooding in Rio de Janeiro, and I'll get into that later on in the presentation. And then I conclude with some observations about the complications of both doing this mapping work and also how the outcomes go beyond just the actual physical maps that are produced, but actually the process of mapping. Can you continue the video or move it forward?
Can y'all hear me right now?
Yes.
Okay, let me try this.
If you just forward on past the introduction.
Okay, we'll see how this goes. This is the adventure of Zoom conferencing.
I will talk about the discrepancies with defined place and health.
Is that better?
Defining place has been the source of much debate, and I don't have time to go into. However, community mapping projects aimed at highlighting the connections between place and health have also wrestled with how to properly represent social and spatial needs. Through collective identity making, as well as assertions of identity through imposed boundaries. While relying on the theory that collective knowledge results in a more accurate depiction of community, the methods of mapping vary from simultaneously coordinating group mapping activities to aggregating personal representations of the boundaries of one's community. These approaches rely on the assumption that collective mapmaking will ultimately aggregate each community member's depictions of their lives at their center of their neighborhood, whether the aggregation of individual conceptions of place are negotiated by the participants in the collective mapmaking process or by the mapping software in post-aggregation. The results are assumed to reveal the general boundaries of a community. Community mapping processes have revealed the neighborhoods are not static, and residents' conceptions of boundaries in neighborhoods rarely match the formal administrative boundaries. Few urban spaces exemplify the negative linkages between place and health as informal settlements, or more commonly known terms slums and shantytowns. These areas, characterized by their lack of municipal infrastructure, such as safe drinking water, sewerage, garbage collection, and electricity, as well as low-quality dwellings and irregular building patterns that can inhibit mobility and exacerbate the deprivation of critical infrastructure. Informal settlement dwellers are often described as living in poverty with low levels of formal education and frequently subjected to social marginalization, conditions linked with poor health, whether directly as a result of increased presence of disease vectors or indirectly as a result of limitations residents face in addressing their health needs. In our increasingly urbanized global population, nearly 1 billion of the world's city dwellers live in informal settlements. However, these numbers have been viewed skeptically as an underestimate. In 2010, the Brazilian census, for the first time, actually counted folks who lived in informal settlements nationally. Now, I put here a slide that since 1953, this was done in Rio de Janeiro, which at the time was the capital, but it was not done nationally. So the 2010 census was the most comprehensive, and they included a classification for census. They marked census tracts as being informal, or this term that they use, aglomerado subnormais, or AGSN for short, which were areas that had over 50 households, but the property rights were considered tenuous, and they had an inadequacy of provision of water, electricity, sanitation, and trash collection. So a recent body of literature has emerged examining the slum divide in Rio de Janeiro through the comparisons of the AGSN and non-AGSN census tracts. An analysis of the 2010 census found that residents of an informal city are poor, less educated, and have access to lower quality municipal infrastructure than their formal city counterparts. However, their analysis also revealed a high degree of variability within the non-AGSN or formal city. Similar mixed results emerged in comparisons of tuberculosis rates, revealing health disparities between the formal and the informal settlements in Rio de Janeiro, and high incidence of tuberculosis in areas adjacent to AGSN census tracts, so those just outside of the AGSN. While a retrospective analysis of prevention strategies for mother-to-child HIV transmission in Rio de Janeiro found no statistically significant differences in preventative care compliance. A cross-sectional study of pregnant women with known or suspected exposure to arboviruses responsible for Zika, dengue, and chikungunya found an overrepresentation of residents living in AGSN, suggesting these areas pose an increased risk. So this work seeks to add to the literature on neighborhood construction and the challenges of using opportunistic data sets to contribute to our understanding of the complicated linkages between place and health. With its well-cataloged neighborhood boundaries, rich array of community-level household and demographic data, and growing presence of community mappers, Rio de Janeiro presents a fertile ground for such an examination. So in April 2010, a devastating landslide took the lives of at least 27 residents in Morro dos Prazeres, a neighborhood of Rio de Janeiro that is officially recognized by the municipal government as a favela. In the aftermath of this tragic event, the mayor of Rio de Janeiro actually attempted to remove folks from these communities using the claim that these areas were considered unstable, environmentally precarious areas. However, residents fought back and actually won the right to remain in their homes. But as a part of that process, residents actually engaged with the process of community mapping, particularly this one group from with the collaboration with the Center for Health Promotion, in collaboration with MIT and public labs, and the United Nations Infant Child Education Fund, sought to actually map some of these communities to do a youth-led digital mapping project, part of this Voices of Youth mapping. And what they did was this map with this application, training youth to take points with your smartphone, noting which areas had assets, so places like places where socialization can happen, places of play, schools, nurseries, and also threats, areas where sanitation was a problem, where trash was accumulating, where the landslide risk, walking hazards, and such. On this map, I show you the 10 communities that were actually involved in this mapping work. This happened over 4 years. Over 200 youth throughout these communities were trained and actually engaged in this mapping work. But I'll be talking about the work that was done in Morro dos Prazeres, which you can see the arrow pointing to on your screen. So the methodology for this paper was combining the geospatial data on health threats and resources gathered by the YLDM participants, data from the 2010 Brazilian census, and data from low-income housing registry, as well as semi-structured and formal interviews conducted with residents of Morro dos Prazeres to tease out these kind of distinctions of how people engage with the community. And on the screen, you can see the black points represent all the dots that were in the area of Morro dos Prazeres that reflected where community members identified areas that were either threats or assets. And what I did was taking this data and using an interpolation, kind of point density interpolation around 30 feet buffer, to assume that the kind of inaccuracy that's going to come from these devices, and to use that to then overlay on these administrative boundary map to see just how well the neighborhood community conceptions of place match on with the administrative conceptions of place. And as you can see here, there's quite a bit of overlap or bleeding out from the area that's considered the official favela or the AGSN. The AGSN are the dark purple outlines. The favela are the purple slash marks. And you can see that a good amount of these mapping points were done outside of the official AGSN. Some key areas that popped up were the high school, the main road in Santa Teresa, which is the name of the neighborhood that is adjacent to Morro dos Prazeres, and the police pacification headquarters. These are community police forces that were set up in Rio in the lead up to the Olympics. For the interviews, actually came with some really good data about how people conceive these places. And I'll read you this quote from Caro, one of the youth mappers at the time who I interviewed. And she says, others would say favela. We say more and more comunidade dos prazeres. People say different things. Before I would say I lived in the favela dos prazeres and not anymore. Now I say I live in the comunidade dos prazeres. So this idea of naming is actually also very important. And I don't have time to go into it for this talk, but I'm happy to talk more in the question and answer period. But another key thing that came out of this was the questions about the quality of the census. So I have these two quotes from Orlando and Anders, and I'll read them here. I don't know about the census data is outside of reality. They think that we are very small. The IBGE says that only about half the people live here. The IPP is closer to the places they consult with. The territory are closer to see the real data. And then our answer says, I don't believe that there are 2,300 residents in Los Placeres. I don't believe it at all. I was a census taker. I had to go from house to house to get the data, asking how many people lived here, how many appliances they had. There were 2 of us working census takers, and each of us got nearly the same number, 2,300. So there's no way the community could be so small. And I actually wanted to validate this with the census itself, and using the points that were collected from the youth mappers and overlaying and choosing those census tracts to see how those might compare. And so you can see here is if you looked at only the census tracts that are officially designated as AGSN, you get the 3,400 people number and you get the 1,051 households. But if you actually used all the census tracts where the points showed up from the youth mappers, you see almost a doubling of both households and population. So one of the outgrowths that came out of this project, in addition to revealing these discrepancies between the different conceptions of place, the community actually came together and addressing some of their own concerns from their community within very creative ways. And so one was establishment of the Reciclação project, was to recycle action, Reciclar Ação. And this project actually provided trash collection in the neighborhood, in the community, and the community members actually separated the trash, which they then sent the recyclables down to the formal city for recycling. In the process, they also cleared up areas and made them available for new playgrounds, also made some new community gardens, and really kind of addressed this major concern of community members. Now, you might wonder about how the connection of health is. So a comment from Elisa actually helps to make that connection. You know, physically, the food, the air, the area where you live, if the area has lots of trash, rats, the area isn't healthy, you'll be sick because of that. Physical health needs to be dealt with, environmental health, and sanitation and hygiene. Health doesn't just involve the body. So there's a strong understanding of the connection of trash, the environment, health, and this idea of this Reciclação project, I think really does a great job to bring all those together very neatly. But I'd be remiss to not mention that the 2010 census will be happening in 2020 census will be happening in August. This, of course, is the plan. Given that we are doing this meeting virtually, there are certainly questions about whether or not this will go through as planned, and the questions that I've already raised in terms of the accuracy of the depiction of the communities reflected in the census. So conclusion, wrapping this up here, place designations do not consistently capture the socio-spatial linkage of environmental and health problems. The perceptions of community and extension neighborhood boundaries do not always conform to the administrative boundaries. These different conceptions of community boundaries may contribute to misunderstandings of top-down descriptions of communities and may impact communities and their ability to access resources from the state through a loss of political representation and funding for local services. State-gathered data and place categories must be validated and translated when engaging at the community scale. And this case highlights the potential that undercount for informal settlements globally, and the act of mapping, more so than the map itself, contribute to the fostering of a sense of community to address the concerns raised in the mapping process. I want to thank all the folks in Los Placeres, folks at UERJ, the State University of Rio de Janeiro, Center for Health Promotions, Fiocruz, UC Berkeley, many of my colleagues for helping me to make this happen. So thank you very much.
All right, so post some questions online. Looks like Aida's already got one. Eileen, do you want to take it? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted.
That's okay.
So Aida asked this. They said, "Hi Guillermo, great presentation. I really appreciate the opportunity to see how the youth mappers view their community. And I'm wondering if you could speak more to how or if this information is going to be utilized by community members slash organizers."
Thank you for the question. So as you saw in the last slides, I think one of the big outgrowths was this Reciclação project, and that was for the community of Los Placeres. But these mapping processes actually have spurred communities throughout Rio de Janeiro who have already been doing this kind of community work. But I think the key is that the map products themselves have not been utilized. Many of the residents who I spoke with actually only saw the maps during the formal presentation after the project, but have not really used them since. But I think the key takeaway is not that the map was unsuccessful, because it was the outgrowth of the community organizing, and the mapping process was that kind of nexus for bringing people together. And since then, this particular group of Multiple Prazeres is actually involved with another group called the Sustainable Favela Network, which is again putting groups throughout Rio de Janeiro who are engaged in practices that would be qualified under sustainability and are doing projects like the recycling, solar panels, trash, biodigesters, and what have you. And so I think the key has been just the bringing people together in these virtual spaces. And now folks are using WhatsApp to have these conversations. But again, the maps themselves have actually not, I think as a geographer, you know, looking at maps, I think that, oh, the map should be the thing, but it's really the process of engaging with that communication and building those networks that have been helpful and very fruitful.
I'm going to go ahead and I think that's a great insight, and I think that's really important. We're a little behind, so I'm going to keep us moving, but there's already Danny Black's got a question on there, and Guillermo, I'll encourage you to continue to engage on the chat area, but let's move on to our next speaker. Actually speakers. Ahmed, do you want to introduce yourself, and Ajeev?
Yes, hi, good morning or good afternoon from Toronto. This is Ahmed Allahwala from the University of Toronto, Scarborough.
Hi everybody, Ajeev Bhatia. I'm a youth organizer in East Scarborough. Okay,
I'm going to try a different sound setting. Let me know in the chat if this doesn't work for y'all, but I think this should work a little bit better. I'll go ahead and play their presentation.
Great. Good morning from Toronto. My name is Ahmed Allahwala. I'm a university-based geographer at the University of Toronto, and this is?
Ajeev. I'm a community-based youth organizer.
We're grateful to be with you this morning, and we're just moving into a presentation mode here so that you can see our slides. We have been working together, engaging young people in neighborhood-based geographic research for the past 8 years. This paper that we're presenting to you today revolves around the creation of L.I.F.T. L.I.F.T is a youth research collective that emerged in 2012 out of an ongoing partnership between the University of Toronto Scarborough campus, which is my home campus, and various community organizations in the Kingston-Galloway-Orton Park neighborhood, a low-income inner suburban community in close proximity to the university campus, about 15 miles northeast of downtown Toronto. By critically reflecting on our shared experience in a multi-year youth-led research project on the state of community social infrastructure involving both university undergraduate students in geography and high school-aged youth, we explore the potential of community geography as an approach to youth engagement in community development and neighborhood-based youth work. We applied critical reflection as a dialogical technique in our work, used in community development contexts, to reflect on our mutual youth engagement practices and the research that we've done. Based on this systematic reflection that Ajeev and I engaged on, we developed a series of codes to deductively analyze 3 years of monthly meeting minutes of the L.I.F.T Youth Research Collective to come up with the findings in this paper. Our overarching goal and objective is to contribute to the development of a youth-focused and youth-led community geography practice. We hope to productively trouble perhaps unproblematic notions of community and community geography by highlighting the importance of age as social location and how age-related social differences might shape research initiatives and the relationship among participants in the research collective. We're particularly interested to interrogate what childhood and youth studies and children and youth geography can offer community geographers, both in terms of theory development and research practice. Our intention in this paper then is both conceptual, theoretical, and practical. First, on a theoretical level, we map out some of the conceptual and theoretical anchors of a youth-focused community geography. By doing this, we want to connect directly to ongoing discussions about the theoretical foundations of community geography, in particular, a forthcoming paper by Jerry Shannon and others on thinking community geography. It is worth mentioning in this context that community geography and critical youth geography share a common intellectual history. Bill Bunga's work is particularly relevant here. Through his work with the Detroit Geographical Expedition, Bunga showed how urban environments are fundamentally adult-centric, limiting both the mobility and circumscribing the spatial practices of young people. Importantly also is the rise of what has become known as the new social studies of childhood, essentially a critique emanating from primarily sociology and anthropology of developmentalist understandings of childhood and youth, and instead emphasizing the social construction of these age categories. Geographers, in turn, have productively engaged with the new social studies, and there's been a desire to better understand children's spatial practices and everyday life worlds, and this had important implications for geographic research with young people, particularly because of its methodological affinity to participatory methods. In the paper, we review the methodological debates in the field over the last couple of decades. Second, on a more practical level, our paper discusses the ethical practical challenges of engaging young people in the actual work of doing community geography. And we articulated a series of practical recommendations for what we call a non-adultist community-based geographic research practice. For the purpose of this paper and in our work, we understand adultism following John Bell as all the attitudes and actions that flow from the idea that adults are superior to young people, end quote. And I'm going now to pass over to Ajeev, who will share some of the empirical details of our study with us.
Thank you, Ahmed. Over the past 3 decades, socio-spatial polarization has become a defining feature of Toronto's social geography. In 2005, the City of Toronto launched a place-based policy framework focusing on communities with poor access to services that face significant challenges. These so-called priority neighborhoods were identified using simple GIS buffering techniques to measure the proximity of neighborhood residents to community infrastructure, while also taking into consideration various forms of social need. Furthermore, a rise in youth gun violence during the summer of 2005 became an additional factor in determining neighborhoods for intervention. The Priority Neighborhoods Policy Framework, coupled with significant provincial funding for youth programming, entrenched community-based youth-led organizing within the 13 priority neighborhoods, one of which is the Kingston-Galloway-Orton Park community, the community that I was born and raised in, and which the L.I.F.T Collective is based, and within the city's social policy agenda more broadly. Community-based youth-led programming, services, and engagement were seen to be foundational to building stronger and healthier communities. Following one of Canada's largest mass shootings in the neighborhood the L.I.F.T Collective was located in, community leaders were strategically organizing towards positive change. The Youth-Friendly Community Recognition Program, a provincial initiative by youth-focused organizations in Ontario, which recognizes communities that prioritize youth programs, was the catalyst for the creation of the Youth Research Collective. In 2012, a network of community-based organizations and city staff connected with Ahmed to identify opportunities for undergraduate students to get involved in a youth-led research project to explore social infrastructure in East Scarborough. Typically, the youth-friendly communities applications are completed by municipalities in a top-down and rather bureaucratic fashion. Our intent from the very beginning was to put together the application through an inclusive and bottom-up process. This resulted in the recruitment of youth leaders from the community, including myself, along with several others, to ground the project in the priorities of local youth and support their research efforts, seeking a process where youth were the lead researchers. The goal was to flip the premise of the recognition program from one where youth are idle subjects of evaluation to one where they produce knowledge and critically examine the criteria through their lived realities. From 2012 to 2014, for 3 fall semesters, about 75 undergraduate students enrolled in a third-year seminar conducted the research in partnership with community youth. The syllabus and seminar plan was repurposed to facilitate the research and put together the youth-friendly communities application. Concurrently, the L.I.F.T Collective developed around a core group of youth leaders supported by adult allies in the form of a steering group, which led the youth-friendly community research project and application submission. Throughout the 3 years of the youth-friendly communities research, students and community youth worked on a small number of youth-friendly community criteria each fall semester. Over the course of the winter and spring, the L.I.F.T steering group validated the data and polished the representation of data for broader community dissemination. Data was gathered using a variety of place-based participatory methods, which included neighborhood surveying and audits, key informant interviews, neighborhood walking tours, walking interviews, and go-alongs. Community participatory mapping exercises were used as a technique for understanding and discovering the features of the community from the perspective of the map maker. Geographic information systems were also used to explore the accessibility and proximity of youth to social infrastructure and resources. In the fall of 2015, after 3 years of research, the L.I.F.T Collective finally submitted a 286-page application to the two playworks, containing evidence that East Scarborough was in fact a youth-friendly community. The L.I.F.T Collective attended a ceremony organized by Parks and Recreation Ontario in early 2016 to accept the youth-friendly communities designation on behalf of the East Scarborough community. You can see us here on the left, regrettably missing Ahmed from this image, receiving the designation at the award ceremony. By way of closing, a few words about how we engage in reciprocal partnership development as the foundation for our project. L.I.F.T adopted a youth-led adult partnership model for its work. Unlike other initiatives in the community where youth are simply informed or consulted, this partnership model begins with local youth. It is done so by building on the existing momentum of grassroots youth leaders advancing neighborhood-level priorities, as opposed to inserting external aspirations onto the community and then seeking buy-in. As a result, youth are the driving force for the actions and directions of the work. In the paper, we identify core assumptions and commitments of a youth-focused community geography. They are critical about the power dynamics that exist between the academy and community. They question traditional forms of knowledge production and posit that deep relationships, trust building, and research in service of community priorities are critical to youth-focused community geography. The tool shown on this slide was used to guide our partnership development. This was taken from the East Scarborough storefront. We have put together a one-page document with this tool and our assumption and commitments to youth-focused community geography. And we're happy to share this with you upon your request. Our emails are included here on this last slide.
Okay, we're almost out of time. We only have 12 minutes for this presentation, so thank you all for listening. We hope this was inspiring and started the conversation. We hope to, I guess, all see you again in person, maybe at next year's AAG. So thank you very much for listening.
All right, I hit the wrong button here, sorry. Pause that. Okay, questions? It looks like we've got some stuff posted already. Eileen, do you wanna?
Yes. Okay, so great job, Ahmed and Ajeev. We have a question from Annette. This is fantastic. As someone who teaches a community planning studio for undergrads, I am really interested in learning how you aligned or adapted the university calendar, semester-long courses, etc., to community processes.
Will I take this, Ajeev?
That's all you, Ahmed.
Okay. What was really important in the process was that my commitment to the community was a long-term commitment, and we realized that we have the students, the undergraduate students, for 12 weeks at a time. So we were from the very beginning rolling this out as a 3-year project, and we knew that once per year we would have about 25 or so undergraduate students as researchers joining the project. So one of the objectives was always to really structure the fall term very tightly with clear deliverables about what the research process should be. The students came in at a time when the L.I.F.T Collective had already identified what the priorities for the fall semester would be. So it was a combination of annual data collection with a 3-year kind of a longer term structure of the process. You're absolutely right. One of the challenges that we encounter in this work is that as soon as the term is over, we have very little control of retaining students to continue the work, and sometimes the work isn't done by the time the semester is done. So we were quite intentional in rolling this out as a 3-year project, knowing that students would come and go at specific times in the process. We did post our email, so if you want to get the syllabus, get a sense of how we actually implemented this, please do send us an email.
Oh, great. This is from Kay Mariner. So thank you so much for this important work. Could you talk a bit more about the Institutional Review Board ethics process for incorporating youth into community geography research?
And if we can keep it to around a minute or so, and then we'll move on to the next one.
That's definitely you, Ahmed.
It's not an easy process. At the University of Toronto, we have what's called a course-based blanket ethics approval. So we can submit a small ethics review application internally to the department. The key objective for us was always to rate this research as both low risk and see the participants as low in terms of low vulnerability. One of the ways in which we engaged this is that we always work with already existing groups. So when we were engaging youth in the community, we were already working with it within a framework of already existing youth groups meeting monthly in the community. So we didn't necessarily go out, recruited youth. We were kind of always embedded within existing structures and programming in the community. Another avenue of how we dealt with ethics is sometimes we framed the research as program evaluation in partnership with youth organizations. I'm going to maybe let Ajeev speak to that as well. Do you have anything further to add? But I appreciate the question because sometimes there's quite a bit of a time delay in getting the ethics approval, especially when there are questions coming back from the ethics review board about working with a minor. Ajeev, do you want to jump in, or
can I encourage Ajeev to reply in the chat so we can keep things?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, that'd be great. And there's a couple other questions I think on there. So thank you all. This is great. This is really amazing. We're going to jump ahead to Aida Guhlincozzi. I'll let her just say hi here while I get this queued up.
Great questions, Aida. It was certainly a long-term project. There were a few key factors.
Oh, what is that? That's weird. Okay, Aida, are you there? I think you might be muted. Just want to say hi?
Sorry about that. That was me.
Oh, it's okay. I was like, oh, what is that? I'll just go ahead and start her presentation here.
Yes. Okay. Hi. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. So I'm Aida Guhlincozzi, and I'm going.
Oops. Go ahead.
And I'm at the University of Illinois. That's pretty much all I say. But I have a co-author, Julia Cisneros, who is completely like my partner on all of this, so I'm just mentioning her name as well, but that's all it. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, we'll go ahead and feel free to continue the conversation about the last presentation or this one in the chat.
I'm going to be talking to you about our paper on institutional partnerships as a community geography method for improving diversity and inclusion in the geosciences. So diversity and inclusion in the geosciences is something that Julia and I are particularly interested and invested in because we are both Latinas in the geosciences, and we don't usually see other Latinas or other people of color in the geosciences, and we began to wonder about this. Around this time that we first started discussing this, we received this article noting that diversity has not improved in the past 40 years, and as a result of that first article, we started looking into literature finding that this is an ongoing issue, persisting in the face of a conversation surrounding it for the past 20 years. So we began looking into the literature even further and found that that conversation has seen that the geosciences is the least diverse in the sciences. There's been little to no progress on diversity and inclusion, and there are many reasons offered for this, including the leaky pipeline as a result of suffering from losses in recruitment, retention, and placement stages, a lack of focus on race and ethnicity until recently because it was primarily focused on gender parity, and a lack of positive views on women, especially minoritized women, which leads to an unequal distribution of professional opportunities, which are crucial for academic advancement. However, the pipeline model itself is also considered problematic, mostly because of its lack of focus on the structure of academia itself, which has less value on service mission.
I'm sorry.
And so, to simply add more people from minoritized backgrounds to a system that has actively been created to prevent their inclusion does not create an environment that will retain and value them, and that's the key issue we see with the pipeline model. However, we also see community geography as a successful methodology for addressing diversity and inclusion in the geosciences due to its many methods for engaging with the community and supporting community goals and its focus on different opportunities for how to do exactly that. Community geography also values facing the power structures that created inequality in these communities in the first place, and offers different methods to the communities for making sure that addressing of the situation happens. Two specific goals of community geography that we feel are particularly salient to our paper include creating reciprocal relationships between university and community partners, and a negotiation of collaborative knowledge production and shared power. However, we also see that there is a lack of actual discussion on the actual partnership structure between the academic institution and the community partner/organizations in the literature, which is what we seek to, a gap that we seek to fill with our paper. As mentioned previously, Julia and I are both veterans in the geosciences, but here's some context on our journey to the geosciences and why we considered a camp as an important avenue for improving diversity. We both have prior camp experiences we believe were crucial for bringing us into the geosciences. These were local institution-based concerted efforts to incorporate students from various backgrounds aimed at recruiting underrepresented students into the sciences. And they gave us the opportunity to have activities that were project-based and guided by actual geoscientists who also provided mentorship during the camp. Our own experiences were key to informing our own successful creation and implementation of GCamp itself. This event was completely graduate student-led, with a diverse representation of geoscientists available from our volunteers of the graduate students. Most resources were already in existence, donated, or at minimal cost to the departments and other institutional organizations who were partnered in the creation of this camp. Ultimately, the camp was very successful. We had 30 participants, and they had a lot of opportunities to engage with the geosciences in a variety of ways, and ultimately really enjoyed the camp, as you can see here, from all of this different feedback of their positive experiences. So the timeline of the development of this camp begins with that original inspiration of this topic from that first article, us pitching the camp, and then developing an IRB so we could test the effectiveness of the camp. And in the meantime, we were visiting the communities that we wanted to be recruiting in, participating in community events that would allow us to help generate interest in the geosciences to improve our recruitment, which was ultimately so successful we were able to receive funding and approval for the holding of our camp. And so then we actually held the camp, and it, like I mentioned, was a great success. For the rest of this presentation, I will be focusing on this part of the timeline so we can discuss the importance of developing institutional partnerships and a reproducible model for doing so. So our research questions for this paper were: what institutional partnerships were most successful in directly impacting student learning and engagement? How did the themes we identified lead to a successful camp in comparison to other camps? And how do we establish ongoing institutional partnerships focused on student interests, needs, and opportunities? To answer these questions, we had a multi-step process that can be seen here with this model of our methods, showing that we took our own experiences to inform the design of our camp, then later identified key themes to the success of all 3 camps. Then we used those themes to evaluate 4 other camps that had the same diversity and inclusion in the geosciences goals and were currently ongoing. Here are the 4 themes with the subthemes or thematic actions that could be seen in the camps. So for example, access includes providing cost-free or limited cost opportunities for the participants. Transparency includes highlighting and educating students about geosciences careers while also being honest about the lack of diversity and efforts to improve that lack. Opportunities and outcomes include offering representation of minoritized people in the geosciences, and relationships includes gaining community support of local institutions for that institutional partnership. And these were crucial to the development of a partnership, all 4 of these themes. So our findings when we evaluated the different camps were across the camps informing our institutional partnership model are available here. So the results of that evaluation are available here. We found patterns across the camps informing that model. So you can see that there were patterns by theme of what actions were most important. So again, with access, there was a clear pattern. All of these camps were cost-free. With transparency, almost all of these camps made sure to have a discussion of diversity and barriers in institutions with students. Opportunities and outcomes, they've focused on offering representation of minoritized scientists in hands-on engaging activities. And in terms of relationships, it was really important for the community support of local institutions to be available and justifying the cost of the camp. So we also found something else, that there appears to be a change occurring over time with the camps. As they become embedded in the community, they move away from an original pipeline model to a structural change model because of that embedding in the community. So we can see this here with theme 3, opportunities and outcomes, of 3.3, developing community support for the field of geosciences. So really going into the community and actually connecting and explaining what the goals of these camps were. We found that the older camps do this, such as GEMS. They didn't originally realize there was a need for transportation from their participants, and that developed over time as they continued to work with the community. And we suspect that BEST and STEAM Activated will also develop a structural change model and move away from a pipeline model if they continue to be successful and connect with the community. So our model can be conceptualized through this image. There is a toxic river made impassable by the poison of racism, exclusion, sexism, and other biases. On either side of the river, there are 2 institutions, Institution A being the academic institution, and Institution B being the community. These 2 institutions want to work together and have built a bridge to make this possible. However, there is no trust between them because of the history, so the bridge is locked on both sides of the river. The only way to open these gates is to have all 4 themes, or keys, to unlock it. With all 4 themes, the gates can be permanently unlocked and the bridge freely open, symbolizing a sustainable institutional partnership. So, in conclusion, to create actual change regarding diversity in the geosciences with community geography methods, academic institutions need to be transparent. They need to build relationships with the community that prioritizes the community's needs and interests, and they need to be willing to change the institution itself, or else we will never be successful at increasing diversity in the geosciences. So, thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any more questions that you may have. Julia is also happy to receive questions too. Thank you.
All right, we'll pause it there, and I'm going to stop the screen sharing. Eileen, take it away. Oh,
hey. Okay. So great presentation, Ida. It was really great. From Guillermo, excellent bridge metaphor. Amy would like to know more, would love more detail on these camps, if you have anything to share about that. You're muted.
Yeah, hold on, I'm making you a co-host, sorry. Okay, now you can unmute yourself.
Okay, hi. So yes, these camps were great, and they we actually have an entire appendix in attachment for our paper. So I'd be happy to share that with you to talk, so that way you can see more of the analysis that we performed over these camps, and you can have access to some of the information that we had access to. Some of it is privileged, of course. We had to contact some of the camp organizers, but I'm happy to share that with you and be more in conversation with you. All of these camps had to be ongoing, so they are all currently available to view online, you know, some of their documents and stuff. So you can learn more about them, and I will drop my email in there so you can see that. Can I respond to another question? I can read them, so that's fine. Is that good? Okay.
Sure.
So Amanda, do you see any role for geography education programs? If you mean in terms of contributing to the development of these programs, yes, absolutely. So as part of our efforts to be in the community and to connect with the community, like I said, we were actually planning this camp for an entire year. And so while we were planning, we were at the middle schools that we were recruiting at, hosting events, so that, and we've been continuing to do that prior to social distancing. And so we were creating these not camp related geographic and other geosciences related activities for them to participate in that any student could participate in, because these were community events. So children as young as 5 were attending. So I ended up designing both. I don't have an actual education teaching background quite yet, you know, so I would love to be able to be in conversation with folks who actually regularly study education and teaching. And, you know, I did check out a book on participatory community events. It's actually a great text that I would be happy to share, but you know, so I think there's absolutely a lot of opportunity for partnership here. Yeah, and then
really go ahead and have us move on, and you can respond in chat. Is that good?
Great. Yes, okay. Totally. Thank you,
everyone. That was awesome. Okay, so we have 2 more. We're going to run obviously a little bit over our scheduled time. I think we're scheduled to end in about 10 minutes, and we still have a couple more presentations. I would imagine us ending around 1:05, 1:10. But I think our speakers are good to go here. So Amy Rock's our next speaker. Amy, do you want to introduce yourself? I think you should be able to unmute yourself. Hold on. I lost my bar. There it is. Give me 1 second. There you go, Amy. I think now you should be able to unmute yourself.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had to jump in my car and drive to campus because my internet went out.
Oh no.
So I'm huddled in my car at the moment. Yeah, so it's interesting that the last talk was about geography and education, because that's one of the bits that's going to be in my talk coming up. So I guess if you want to go ahead and start it, Jerry, that'd be great.
Okay, sounds good. We'll jump in here.
So this project is a little different for me. In response to Dr. Jerry Shannon's call for papers, I put together a piece on some work that I've been doing for a number of years now, but I never really considered calling it research. The paper and this talk are about using geography as an active partner in the classroom, as opposed to simply teaching geography. The current term for this sort of pedagogy is community-based learning, which at its core is experiential learning, but with a specific community component. CBL courses involve some sort of civic engagement, getting students to interact with local issues and organizations as part of the curriculum. Typically, this work is done in a community local to the university, but not exclusively. In many cases, this involves partnering with local nonprofit organizations, which I'll talk more about in a few minutes. This sort of learning is considered a high-impact practice. The hands-on process brings deeper meaning to the curriculum and aids with critical thinking and information retention. Students also gain a deeper understanding of opportunities and issues in the community and may have the opportunity to engage with cultural groups that are often overlooked in traditional course materials. In the area around Humboldt State University, for example, we are fortunate to have a number of Native American tribes that are very willing to work with our students and help them understand tribal cultures and histories. Bringing community into the classroom manifests typically in one of two ways. Here's where we see who's paying attention. I say two, and yet there are three on this slide. The two principal ways are place-based learning and community-engaged learning, but service learning is sort of an extension or deeper dive into community-engaged learning. They're arranged here in sort of a spectrum, which is intended to reflect the level of engagement in the community as part of the coursework, from place-based at the lighter end to service learning at the more involved end. In place-based learning communities, students are engaged with local community issues through a series of courses, using the community as laboratory and lens, and developing place attachment in the process. Often, students are placed in a cohort and move through a series of courses focused on the specific community, rather than just one course or a portion of a course. Curriculum may involve direct, hands-on work in the community, or classroom-based work with local data and context. The local communities can benefit more directly from having a university in their midst, through innovation or intellectual activity that may be on the frontiers of science and not typically available to the general public. At Humboldt State, we have a few place-based communities, but our flagship program is the Klamath Connection, which studies an environmentally and culturally sensitive watershed in Northern California. Students start with a field trip the week before school starts. Then their first-year coursework in math, science, writing, and more is threaded through with information gathered from the field and from the communities of farmers, fishermen, and Native American tribes with whom they work. Community-engaged or community-based coursework can take a variety of forms, with various levels of involvement between classroom and community. At less in-depth levels, field trips can be incorporated, where students learn from local organizations how the topics they study in the classroom play out in the real world, or work with data from communities or local organizations to practice methods and investigations specific to the course. At a more in-depth level, students might volunteer at vetted sites or work directly with organizations with course-specific guidelines on a project or individual activity. At their most integrated level, they might start to resemble internships and spend considerable time on site to explore career paths or develop a more in-depth foundation for their studies. Service learning is often done at this more in-depth level, but not exclusively, and often the project is likely integrated to some degree throughout the whole of the course. However, it's important not to confuse service learning with professional preparation. Community-based learning and service learning, unlike internships, seek to link real-world experiences to learning, but with reciprocal benefit to communities or individuals. Service learning courses also typically include a reflection component, where students explore their personal growth in relation to the learning experience. Adding geography to community-based learning seems like a natural fit that works at all levels from kindergarten through grad school. Community issues can be connected to academic goals with a spatial lens. An environmental geography course might look at how various issues play out in their community, or work with local government to assess or promote urban planning goals. Younger students might look at safe routes to school, and more advanced students could apply GIS tools to any of these questions, or to help provide solutions for community organizations. Helping students communicate spatial issues and participate in decision-making in their local communities to become better spatial citizens is an added bonus. The development of spatial thinking skills in young children has been linked to success in mathematics and science, and provides advantages in a global society. But we often leave off teaching these skills at an early age, despite the fact that our experience in the physical world forms the foundation of our understanding of it. Pack along a spatial thinking toolkit when you take the classroom out into the community, and amazing things will happen. Students re-examine places they may already know or have just discovered as they make or update maps. Many discover spatial connections for the first time, and by engaging with local organizations in a structured way through class activities, are empowered to be more engaged with their communities long after graduation. Geographic education frequently employs the use of maps, but in the case of community geography, those maps are often being actively investigated rather than passively consumed. Students may be updating or creating maps for the issues they're studying, or empowering community members to contribute to mapping their neighborhood. These interactions provide space for questions that might not ordinarily be asked, or even thought of, as spatial relationships are discovered and explored, and the tools for spatial dialogue become more familiar. These processes can also result in the development of maps or other spatial artifacts that in turn empower the local organizations to help them communicate issues with a broader range of audiences. Some perhaps obvious ways to incorporate geography and community-based learning include mapping social justice issues or identifying areas of environmental injustice. Some of my students mapped out rural broadband access to help a statewide organization advocate for better connectivity for isolated communities. This seems especially meaningful as we sit here and virtually consume our international conference. Another group worked with the local community action agency to help reroute their local bus service to better reach those who need it. These and other spatial decision-making projects were part of a course I'll talk more about in a minute. And of course, the students need not be the ones making the maps. They might be empowering community members to make their own maps or contribute to a larger project, as with some students I have this term who are creating a platform for community members to identify areas for our local coastal cleanup events. So let me talk just briefly about a few courses in which I've incorporated these ideas. The first is a teacher prep course, which is a quick one-semester overview of all things geography, and can be a bit of a fire hose of information for students. It's offered every fall, which coincides nicely with Geography Awareness Week. So when a colleague and I took over the course, we decided to shift more to some pedagogical techniques and tools specific to working with maps, and to incorporate a community outreach project to allow students to practice teaching some geography, which is the whole point of having this course in their curriculum. Thanks to a now retired colleague in our department, Dr. Paul Blank, we possess a collection of laminated 1 to 500,000 tactical pilotage charts covering most of the world. These maps can be patchworked together on the floor to make an impressively large map that can be walked on, crawled on, and generally interacted with in ways that we can't normally do with maps, which students now take out into area schools during Geo Week and dazzle our K-12 students with all manner of geographic lessons. The second course, GIS and Nonprofits, grew out of my own work with nonprofits prior to returning to academia, and paired advanced GIS students with local organizations to do a wide variety of GIS projects. I've mentioned some of these already, some of which resulted in fairly dry maps to be included in reports or grant applications, but others became showpieces for the organizations to include in brochures or hang on the wall. The last course is one I've had in mind for some time, but I've only just had the opportunity to teach it this term. The intent here is to engage students who don't have any GIS experience around spatial thinking and community issues, so we're mostly working toward creating story maps with either maps from other sources or some simple maps created in ArcGIS Online. This course is much more interactive than perhaps the others, with some workshop-style activities around community organizing, political advocacy, and grant writing with a spatial lens. Current circumstances have, of course, changed the way we do quite a bit of this work, but since the students have already met with their organizations a few times and have the information necessary to proceed with their projects, we should be able to maintain most of the intent of the course. I'm happy to talk more specifically about any of these courses. Feel free to contact me via the email at the end. So how can you add community geography to your own courses? The first step is to get to know community organizations, to find the best partner organizations. This includes any campus offices for community engagement. When I first came to Humboldt State, I didn't have the deep local knowledge of my prior community, so I had to just send an email plea via the local nonprofit listserv and then hope to get suitable partners. Some worked better than others. Now that I know the nonprofit community better, I can approach those organizations that fit the needs of that particular course or project and have a better sense of how it will go. Once you meet these folks, keep talking to them, even if you don't have a project that specific term. A lot of this is about building relationships so that if an issue arises during the project, there's already a clear line of communication open. This feeds into the next point, understanding that you can't control everything. There are a lot more moving parts than with a typical assignment. These are real organizations, and real issues may well intrude. A global pandemic is certainly nothing I had a contingency plan for prior to this term, but because we had some power shutoffs last term because of wildfires, I had started to think about project continuity a little bit more than before. Some projects will certainly have to undergo some change of scope, and in fact, I'm meeting with some students later today to talk about some of that. If you've never done anything like this before, start small. Don't plan your whole class around a community project, but instead, try a single assignment. Perhaps some real-world data in a lab activity. We've done travel time analysis for fire response in advanced courses, or had students collect GPS data or good geocaching in introductory courses. In lecture format courses, students could do some research on local organizations, or a field trip, real or virtual, to the local food bank or recycling facility, for example. Choose something low stakes to get your feet wet, and then build from there. There's no requirement that community engagement needs to occur over the entire semester for it to be a valid experience. Last but not least, check in with your students and with the community partners about the entire experience, not just the results, and then use that to make the experience even better. Make sure everyone knows how to provide feedback during the assignment, but then also consider a more structured survey at the end. You'll be amazed at what you learn. There are clear benefits here for students in that they feel more connected to the community, but also to the curriculum. Community members obviously benefit from any project outcomes, and also that more people know about what's happening in their community. Even the campus benefits, from improved town-gown relations to providing great examples for recruiters to talk about, to improving retention rates because students find meaning in their coursework and develop ties to their communities. But there's one more benefit. You, as the instructor, may find research opportunities in the course as a whole, or by increased awareness of local issues. And this work may count as service or community outreach work for your dossier. These types of courses are often a bit more work, but they're incredibly rewarding. I'm happy to answer any questions if we have time, or feel free to email me. Thank you.
All right. I'll stop share. We have time for a question or two.
All right, I think I covered some of the big one here. We've got a colleague at another Cal State. Hi.
Our next presenter.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Okay. Yeah. So we have a California Geographic Society meeting that typically follows AAG by a week or two, and obviously it's also been canceled because of the social distancing. And I had hoped to kind of explore some of these things with folks there, but I'm certainly willing to do that by email. We have, some of these things have been much more engaged with the community partners than others. That's part of the point that I'm making about, start small if you've never done this before. So the Geography for Teachers course, they go out, the students coordinate with the teachers for a few weeks before Geography Week in order to make sure that they can try to fit the lesson into what the teachers are already doing. And then they just basically go in for one lesson. So they're interacting in the classroom for about 45 to 50 minutes, and then that's it. But they are working with the teachers a little bit beforehand. Some of the other courses, the students are coordinating with the partners throughout the whole semester. They're doing much more in-depth things. We had students that did, as I mentioned, some spatial analysis projects. We had some that did some, a couple folks here have worked with local native plant gardens and done species mapping, which involves them going out and doing some GPS field work and things like that. So lots of different ways to roll it into your classroom. Like I said, in some of our courses, we simply work with a community partner to get their data. We work with the local fire stations to get their data, their travel time data. We worked with the local waste management folks so that we could do a routing project in one of our advanced GIS programs. So, you can do it lightweight and just get data and bring it into the classroom, or you can go whole hog and just integrate the students with the partner as much as possible.
I'm going to go ahead, given the time, I don't have any other questions posted here, but thank you so much, Amy. And we'll move on to our last presenter, who's actually going to present live. So this is going to be a whole different experience for all y'all. But Annie, do you want to introduce yourself, and I'll get your slides queued up?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Annie or Annette Koh. I am sort of invisibly both located in the University of Hawaii at Manoa, but I'm also teaching as a lecturer at, in Cal State at Cal Poly Pomona. So hi to Pomona College, Guillermo. So I guess I'll just begin here, which is, this work is coming out of sort of associated with my dissertation research, and it dates back to 2015. So I'll just begin. So the paper I'm presenting is titled Represencing an Effective Archive Contesting Present-Day Development in Honolulu. So this is really coming out of a question: how can we expand contemporary struggles for spatial justice when so much of urban development feels foreordained? Right? Yet another neighborhood threatened by gentrification, yet another mega project that will displace low-income residents. And here I suggest that the praxis of what I call archival community geography, or archive as method, can cultivate an effective possibility in present-day politics, that by bringing other temporalities into palpable being, that we can expand our capacities to imagine, enact different futures, and two, that we should complicate teleological definitions of urban development, especially through the kind of complexities available in the archives. So I'm going to begin with context on the designated redevelopment district, and then I'll discuss kind of effect in archives, and then share the project as an illustrative exploration. Actually, Jerry, could you go back to the title? No, it's okay. It's, yes. So Kaka'ako is in Honolulu's urban core, and the image shows a historical slide, map of the redevelopment district. It's in between Waikiki and downtown, so you can imagine that it's sort of hot real estate. And in the decades before and after the illegal annexation of the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1898, this sort of quiet, marshy area turned into a hub of industrialization, as well as a working class residential neighborhood. Canneries, ironworks, a mix of Native Hawaiians, Portuguese, Japanese, Chinese, Filipinos. It was a very diverse, close-knit working class neighborhood. Next slide, please. So following 1959 statehood and the a huge increase in population. In 1974, the state declared Kaka'ako redevelopment district to capitalize on neighborhood's potential for residential growth. In the decades since, so basically from 1974 forward to today, observers have equated this promised revitalization with the removal of local residents and businesses, with the erasure of local meanings in favor of wealthy outsiders. Redevelopment has proceeded in fits and starts, with only really traction gained after the 2008 mortgage crisis recovery. And the two major private landowners with 60 acres and 40 acres apiece have turned to cultural strategies to promote a sense of local belonging and kind of diffuse some of the controversy over the development. Next slide, please. So the definitions of kind of localness as well as Hawaiianness have always been contested. In the case of Kaka'ako, one of the major landowners is a Native Hawaiian land trust. And this is what's pictured here on the slide. Kamehameha Schools, formerly known as Bishop Estate, has been at the center of many of these struggles in the past. But now in the 21st century, instead of defining progress and Hawaiian values as antithetical, now development in Kaka'ako was being framed as being for and by Native Hawaiians. An opportunity for cultural flourishing, a continuation with the past, even though very few locals, and especially very few Native Hawaiians who experience much higher rates of homelessness, can actually afford the new condo prices. Next slide, please. So affect and urban development. I think affect and belonging undergird many of these kind of spatial interventions used both from below and from above. So whether it's historical districts or street murals that memorialize local figures. So affect is being mobilized as a sales technique. You know, the excitement of pop-up festivals or the aesthetics of urban countercultures. I am a planning person, so I should note that planning scholars have not really looked into affect as much. We're kind of still a very positivist discipline, but obviously geographers have explained or engaged with the affective turn for much longer. So what I'm interested here is not just affect in terms of its impact in urban planning and development, but also trying to understand how the multi-layeral layers of temporalities so sort of the past into the present and the past into the future, and you know, vice versa, actually can play out as political interventions. Next slide, please. So in terms of archives, I think there's been some very exciting discussions in post-colonial studies and other disciplines as to its possibilities as site of resistance. And reconsidering the colonial archive, scholars such as Ann Stoller have examined them as epistemological experiments that are processes rather than things, that are cross-sections of contested knowledges rather than uncontested sources of fact. In art history and art, they've looked at the archives as a way to cultivate a capacity to see things that don't seem to be there, to enable us to glimpse ghostly presences. Next slide, please. So the project I'm talking about, the Living Archive, was created by my original co-author, Adele Bolliston, who had launched the overall project as part of an ongoing kind of psychogeography, 88 block walks, walking tour that had been examining these themes of gentrification and displacement in the neighborhood of Kaka'ako since 2014. The Living Archive was staged in 2017 as a way to sort of re-presence these neighborhood voices from the past. These neighborhood voices actually come out of an archive of student papers from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, which I encountered very serendipitously thanks to an archivist who said, by the way, did you know that there's papers dating back to the 1920s that cover and research Kaka'ako? So, next slide, please. They pulled out, I think 10 or 12 papers looking at Kaka'ako. Given the 1920s, it was very much framed in sort of Chicago School of Sociology, right? So they're trying to use land values and little maps of the housing and demographic data as evidence for social woes. They deployed sociological terminology or talking about things in terms of objectivity, but also at the same time, these papers were completely suffused with affect, judgment, confusion, defensiveness, celebration, and nostalgia. So the quote that I share here is from a paper in the early 30s that described the neighborhood as depressed, deteriorated, pathetic, though not apathetic, and this feeling of, these feelings sort of emerged from all these papers in very interesting ways. Next slide. But there's also other valuations of place, right, that asserted decolonial rights to the city, that revealed how Native Hawaiian understandings of land continued. They also challenged definitions of blight. They complicated these sort of teleologies of improvement. They echoed present-day planning discourse on livability and walkability in a conversation around, a poor working-class neighborhood. Next, please. So the project itself, the Living Archive, used a set of 3 monologues of performances written through cobbling together of different student papers as well as other oral history materials. And each actor inhabiting 1920s, 1940s, and 1960s sort of performed in the role of an undergraduate student at the University of Hawaii. So this was conceived as an intervention in the sentiment that displacement was foreordained, right? By 2017, there had been a ton of construction and sort of this inevitability, sense of inevitability pervaded kind of all conversations. So we tried to foreground the contingency of what is through what was and what could be. Next slide. So by kind of interrupting 2017 with the 20s, the 40s, and the 60s. And we were not trying to augment reality with like, this is the past, you know, how interesting, but instead fracture an assumed consensus about what was realistic and possible. And we saw these archives as a way to craft a counter narrative against instrumentalized histories of Kaka'ako. And we also weren't trying to prove truth or falsehood with regards to neighborhood history. We really were trying to loosen assumptions about what was possible. Next slide, and last slide. So in the case of Kaka'ako, this luxury enclave under construction was kind of obscured with these ideas of, these feelings of pop-up, excitement, hipster, kind of globalized aesthetics that was framed by Native Hawaiian aesthetics, Pan-Asian diversity. But just because these effective strategies were in some ways very successful, like I was seduced by them, in part, it doesn't mean that effective strategies are necessarily manipulative or liberatory, and that we saw that these kinds of performances and temporary projects could be sites of counter-public formation, and that we were really thinking about, you know, this is just one project, right? This is sort of an example and exploration, and we're really trying to understand how this could be kind of further explored, especially thinking about Kaka'ako as a native land by materializing Native Hawaiian stories, Mo'olelo, Oli, and Mele, in ways that we were not prepared to do at the time, but we hope that you know, other folks who are already doing this work in terms of represencing the past in Honolulu can share with other folks in the future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. This is great. So we've got, I'll let Eileen kind of take the question and answer.
Oh, I see. Is that a question about audience response?
Yeah, it's from Amanda. Did you gauge audience response?
Okay, so this is where, and I put this in the paper draft, we were not actually thinking about this beyond, oh, let's do a cool performance. You know, we want to make this intervention. So our surveys after the performances were very much for the funder. And not necessarily beyond that. So that's one limitation of this particular project.
Okay, got some positive responses.
That was really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just jump in with a spoken question since I have the power of having a microphone. But one of the things I'm thinking about kind of what community geography is that to me has really stood out is this kind of power of assembling a public, going back to thinking of Chicago School and thinking kind of the Dewey pragmatist kind of model. And so that piggybacking on that question of audience response, to what extent have you seen or are you aware that these kinds of presentations, the public performance of research allows you to engage with new kinds of actors that wouldn't have been involved, that might be mobilized to kind of organize around issues of equity and development and these kinds of things?
So I should preface this with Kaka'ako is fairly redeveloped right now. There's Whole Foods, there's luxury, you know, fine dining. So this sort of feels like not a failure, but definitely there's limitations. But to the degree that, especially in planning, there is this push for participation, but folks are very reluctant for good reason to participate via like public hearings or testimony, that I think by presenting kind of narratives and questions and you know, claims of place through artistic you know, forms, through these kinds of you know, whether it's, you know, mapping or whether it's you know, performance, have been successful in opening up these spaces for at least even momentary challenges to urban redevelopment, and that, you know, even these artists who I think have benefited from this particular redevelopment in some ways, right, felt it difficult to actually challenge what was going on. So having the kind of artistic license to do so, I thought was, you know, sort of from the interviews that I've done, people said like, it was really nice to be able to just talk about this, right? It was really nice to hear that other people also see displacement as an issue.
Well, I think given the time, and I don't see any other pending questions, but this was just a really awesome series of presentations, and I think just makes me more excited about seeing this special issue hopefully move forward. We're currently kind of on pause given all that's happening, but in terms of the review process, we hope to pick that up again as soon as it seems practical. So thanks everybody for sticking around. We had a great crew. We were around 30 for most of the time, and this will go on that same YouTube playlist at the end of the video of this actual full presentation. So you can check back there if you'd like to use this as a resource or come back and look at it in the future. So thank you all. One more round of applause. It's great to see all of you in person. So I hope you have a good day and stay safe, and thanks for joining us.